Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, June 14th, and this week, the real winner of the Minneapolis deal, Uber takes a loss and PA drives up safety. Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Brian Green. Brian, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared, and happy Flag Day.
Is it Flag Day? Wow, that's actually, I didn't know that.
It is. It's a great day in the United States. We need to remember when the flag was approved by the Congress back in 1777. So happy Flag Day, everybody.
You know, it's actually interesting. I feel like this is a missed opportunity for Lyft. As you had mentioned many times in the past, they used to have the mustaches. I feel like they could have really honed in on this today.
I think so. You know, this is why we consider you our marketing genius.
Yeah, that's right. I should have called them and said, you guys blew it. You blew it. What are you doing? That's funny. But yeah, so we have some interesting stories today. We're going to jump right into it. You know, I thought, we'll start with this first story here. I thought it was over with Minneapolis, but it's not. The news keeps going on, so we're going to head into it. It looks like the new deal in Minneapolis may be a big win, not for the drivers, but Uber. This is from The Guardian. This just came out. And they explain, quote, on May 20th, the city council heralded a compromise with the ride-hailing companies. Uber and Lyft would agree to an inflation-pegged wage for matching Minnesota's minimum wage of $15 an hour after expenses. Some lawmakers have hailed this as a 20% raise for drivers. However, the deal's pay rates are lower than almost every proposal made over the past 2 years, amid a bitter fight between Uber, Lyft, and their drivers and lawmakers. Now, moving away from data transparency creates a huge hole in the bill. Uber and Lyft reportedly lobbied to block any guarantee of minimum earnings on every trip. Instead, the ride-hail firms will top off drivers whose average earnings are below the minimum during a 2-week pay period. So, Brian, I think we sort of talked about this before. It's a win for drivers, but we did mention before the issue with the transparency.
Yeah, you know, first of all, we're glad that there's going to be some more money going into the drivers' pockets. You know, every little bit helps, and drivers in Minneapolis and in Minnesota are better off today than they were, you know, before this was agreed upon. So, you know, the fight was valid. The fight netted a positive for the drivers, but in the same vein, it really did not achieve everything that drivers were asking for, and it really was a win for Uber in a lot of ways. They now know exactly the bare minimum that they can pay drivers. You know, they're capped at, well, not capped, but the $15 minimum is what they need to meet, and they don't have to share enough information with the drivers to know if that's a fair deal. So data transparency and the information about what the company is taking and percentages and what the passenger is being charged versus what the driver's making, those are all really important facts for the worker to know so that they can appropriately evaluate what they should be earning, their worth to the company. And in this scenario, they just don't get that information. Uber and Lyft are allowed to be not transparent. And you know, years from now, we might be looking at this saying, well, you know, that was a very short-term win, but ultimately it didn't do enough to protect driver interests.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this or not, or if it's even mentioned in the bill, but, you know, they even mentioned the bill codifies pay transparency on the driver's end. It dropped the ordinance's requirement that ride-hail firms make regular and unrestricted data disclosures to the city. So my question is this also restricting transparency if, say, drivers get into an accident and let's say Legal Rideshare would need to get information from the company? Is this now basically saying by law you're not going to get it, or it makes it harder?
Well, I don't think it necessarily makes it harder, but it doesn't make it easier. You know, right now when there's an accident, Uber and Lyft do not freely share information with drivers, passengers, or lawyers. It's a battle. You have to go and you know, a lot of times in order to get the information that you need, you have to file a lawsuit and issue a subpoena. And we would like there to be more cooperation between the company and at least the drivers and the passengers. If there's an accident that takes place, I would like to be able to go to my client and say, hey, can you go into the app and get me X, Y, and Z. And there's some basic data that they can pull, the trip fare, their ratings for the past little bit, things like that. But it's not all the data that we need. And Uber and Lyft make us jump through a lot of hoops, and they make police and law enforcement jump through a lot of hoops to get that data. And this was an opportunity to make that data more readily available, and it did not achieve that end.
Right. And like you said, I think this is something we're going to have to look on in hindsight, maybe a year from now. And I guarantee, I joked and said, I think last podcast we did, looks like the fight's over, the story about Minneapolis is over. It clearly is not. I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. And as just you mentioned, this may become sort of the new standard for Uber, saying, okay, well, this is what we know that we can win, and have the drivers also believe that they're happy with it. So, I guess time will tell on this, and then I guess we're going to see what happens. It's always a time game.
Yeah. And as we'll see in the next couple stories, so we don't want to get too far into this, but Uber and Lyft's main objective is to maintain the independent contractor status of their employees. And this compromise in Minneapolis and in Minnesota achieved that goal for Uber and Lyft. So they're walking away from this quite happy.
Right, exactly. And which, just like you said, this kind of leads us to story number 2 here. Uber takes an L over challenging California law. And this is from Reuters, and they explain, quote, a U.S. appeals court on Monday rejected a bid by Uber and the subsidiary Postmates to revive a challenge to a California law that could force the companies to treat drivers as employees rather than independent contractors who are typically less expensive. So an 11-panel judge of the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco upheld a lower court ruling that said Uber failed to show that the 2020 state law known as AB5 unfairly signaled out app-based transportation companies while exempting other industries. Uber said in a statement on Monday, they said that the ruling would not change the status of its relationships with its drivers, who are considered to be contractors under a 2020 ballot initiative known as Proposition 22, or as we all know it, Prop 22. So this is interesting, Brian. So it's regardless of this, Prop 2 holds, correct?
Yeah, Prop 22 is the law of the land in terms of how independent or how gig workers are classified as independent contractors. So that's where we are. But what Uber was trying to do here was saying that AB5 and initiatives like that should not be allowed to single out gig workers and app-based work when trying to change the classification. So that would be important to them because they don't want laws to be passed that change their business models. What the court in this case is saying is that it was fine for the legislature to single out gig platforms and transportation and delivery companies in that law because the legislatures had a legitimate reason to think that these gig companies were the perpetrators of the problem. They were, misclassifying workers. This was a significant problem within that industry, and perhaps it wasn't such a big problem in other industries. Laws are allowed to be created that have more effect on one industry than another, as long as there's a legitimate reason to do so. And here the court said, no, the legislature was within its right to single out the gig companies because they were the biggest perpetrators of the problem. It wasn't until Prop 22 was passed that essentially codified the independent contractor status of the workers in California. Before that, it was AB5, and Uber and Lyft were very concerned about what AB5 was going to do to their business model and their ability to continue down the path that they've been on for the past decade plus.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question here is that, say Prop 22 never happened or passed, and they went through all this, then AB5 would truly be the law of the land, correct? For at least for San Francisco.
AB5 would have been the law of the land in California. That was a bill that was passed into law, and it affected many industries, but it particularly, per the news, focused on Uber and Lyft. That was the biggest player in that uh, situation. So the law of the land would be the law that was passed, and in that scenario, California was treating gig workers like employees and providing benefits and providing things like paid sick leave. And Uber and Lyft were extremely concerned about that because, like I said before, that fundamentally changed everything about their business model. They're able to make the money that they are by saving expenses on employment related costs like insurance, sick time, contributions to healthcare. You name it. They're not paying into those systems and therefore saving boatloads of money that most employers need to pay.
Right, and we've already discussed multiple times in the past that they are certainly trying to do other similar Prop 22s in other cities and states to do, just like you said, to make sure an AB5 doesn't spring up. I haven't heard about the other ones recently. I'm sure they're still permeating or percolating somewhere. But very interesting kind of how that all played out. And this has obviously been a multi-year deal with California, but, here we are. We're going to head up to the final story. We're going to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. A new proposal in PA aims at increasing safety for passengers. This is from CBS News. They reported, quote, according to the memo written by the Representative Tim Brennan of Bucks County, 50% of all 18 to 29-year-olds and 24% of adults age 50 and older have used a rideshare service. Under the new proposed legislation, drivers would need to take measures to properly identify themselves throughout their vehicle, which includes identification with their photo, name, and license plate number of the vehicle they are driving. There are three main focuses of the proposed legislation. Drivers will need to have the following. They'll need to have markers or signs that can be illuminated. Second thing is barcodes in the rear and passenger windows. And three is credential placards. The bill has yet to be introduced. And he's also asking other members to support the legislation. Bryant, this seems to be something we see a lot of protections for the passengers, but as we know, what about the drivers?
Yeah, first of all, nothing wrong with any of this. It's fine to make rideshare safer for the passenger. I'm glad that they're taking proactive measures, and these things are not overly cumbersome on the driver. I think it's ultimately going to fall on the state and even the rideshare companies to provide these additional safety features to drivers and hopefully ensure that passengers are finding the right vehicles, getting in the car with the right driver. And that's step one to a safe rideshare experience, is finding the right vehicle and making sure that drivers are, properly identified and ultimately identifiable if something goes wrong. So that's great. No problem. But as you just alluded to, all of these laws and all of this news relates to passenger safety. And what we really want to see is attempts and steps to make rideshare safer for everybody. There are ways that passenger can be forced to do, for instance, more background check or better rating reviews, or making them use real names and real payment systems. Like, a lot of times they're able to use non-traceable phone numbers and non-traceable debit cards or things of that nature. So we want to see this work both ways. If you're going to pass a bill and if you're going to, put up a safety demand, let's make it reciprocal. Let's make it protect everybody in the vehicle rather than just, one of the parties. So I have no problem at all with the legislature stepping in and saying, hey, let's try to solve a problem here, which is rideshare safety. I just wish it was a little broader.
Yeah, and this seems to really be a push by one man in office, and he is asking for, other members to support this. And it may come that this does blossom into something larger. Like, I know, for instance, every state obviously operates different, but typically every state and every city often has sort of a driver-focused organization, whether it's union, non-union, or groups. And this may be a thing where, and I know there's a local here is the Philly Drivers Union and others, that maybe this is a good opportunity for them to step in and go, hey, I know you're doing this one part and you're looking for other members to support it, but what about also, X and Y on top of what you want to propose to really make everyone happy? We've seen that in other places. We've seen it in Chicago. I think that would be effective. I think this is the time to spring up and try to jump in there.
I agree. And there are definitely labor friendly um, Congress people who would be happy to have meetings with driver organizations. A lot of times, all it takes is having the organization reach out to the right member of the legislature, and all of a sudden you've got support from that congressperson and all of their buddies. So look at the state legislature, find out who has priority with regard to labor, workers' rights, worker safety. And it doesn't necessarily need to be somebody with rideshare experience or rideshare history. Like find somebody who focuses on construction worker rights or who has stepped in to help unions develop throughout the state. Whatever it may be, if you get the right-minded person, your message is going to go through very easily and easily could have an effect on this bill in terms of safety for drivers as well.
Yeah, totally agree. So, hopefully this happens, and maybe this is just one step forward into, again, like you said, just expanding this, doing it for passengers and drivers. You can say it's not a bad thing. It's certainly not a bad thing at all to help the passengers. It's just, as we've seen before, drivers are also in the crosshairs of a lot of violence and issues. And as everyone knows, everyone's favorite word, deactivation. So it's something that has to keep being alerted to the politicians and members of Congress and everyone else to say, hey, we need to step in here and try to solve this. So
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, I was just going to add that now's the time. Don't delay on this. They're talking about this bill right now. It's pretty unusual that a legislature is going to put forth two different rideshare bills. They're going to do one. So if you want to be included on this one, step up and get into their ears right now, because as soon as this passes, I'm not sure that they're going to be so interested in considering a separate bill for drivers. I think they want to do it more efficiently if they're going to do it.
Oh yeah, totally. 100%. 100%. So that is the stories for this week. But Brian, I'll give you the floor before we head off into the weekend.
Yeah, before we head into the weekend, we always remind people that Legal Rideshare is available for free consultations to anybody who is injured in a rideshare related event. So drivers, passengers, victims, if you suffer an injury related to an Uber, Lyft, or any other app-based system, we are here to help. We put money in people's pockets for things like medical bills, lost wages, pain and suffering, whatever damage you sustain. So please visit us at legalrideshare.com. You'll find all of our contact information, and we are always available to chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryant. And as I like to say, that is the end of this week in Rideshare. See you next week.